Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller. I'm the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project for students, thinedgethewedge.com. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where the Jews were not a Holocaust surviving community, but whose parents and grandparents had come at the turn of the last century fleeing Tsarist Russia. Then in 1970, only 25 years after the end of World War II, my US Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany. This experience changed our lives forever.
Our guest today is Daniel Varnagi. Daniel is a full professor at the Department of Economics and Administrative Sciences at the Social Sciences and Humanities Division at the Simon Bolivar University in Caracas, Venezuela. His research is in political culture, social capital, ethics, and strategic and financial planning. Daniel Varnagi is Jewish and a son of Holocaust survivors. Before we start our discussion with our guest, I'd like to share some background information on Venezuela, a country on the northern coast of South America. There are about 30 million people in Venezuela, and about 7,000 of them are Jews. This is less than 1% of the population. There used to be 3 times as many Jews, but most of them left over the past 2 decades. Most Jews in Venezuela are first or second generation. During World War II, Venezuela welcomed several ships with Jews who escaped Nazi Germany, ships that were rejected by the other ports in the Caribbean. After World War II, Jews emigrated to Venezuela as well. They felt welcome there and became proud Venezuelans. Daniel, we are thrilled to have you on our show and as our guest. Welcome and welcome to our show.
I get to ask the first question today. Could you please tell us the story of your family during the Holocaust and how they got to Venezuela?
Well, thank you very much for this kind invitation. I am very, very happy and thrilled to be with you, Evelyn, with you, Phyllis, and with all of you who are seeing this podcast. I am really very excited to know about this initiative you have, and I am very, very honored and happy to participate with you. Well, my parents arrived Venezuela in 1958. So it was 30 years after World War II. They were survivors from the Holocaust, both of them. And with their parents and one sister of each side, they were survivors. My father was in 3 concentration camps. The third of them was Mauthausen. And my mother was trapped in the ghetto of Budapest. She was able to escape from that ghetto. Well, they were just only 1 month married when in 43, they took my father to the concentration camp. Well, it was the labor camp, the first one. And when he arrived from Mauthausen to Budapest, they decided to continue their lives together. And they had 2 children, which are my eldest brother and the middle one. And in 1958, they decided to abandon Hungary and to come to Venezuela, which was known as a country of a lot of opportunities for mostly everyone. And it was also known that it was a non-anti-Semitic country. They were Jews. They were they were not really truly too religious. They were practicing of or faith, and it was a very good choice. But at that time, they made a very happy life. They died here in Venezuela. They wanted to die in this country, and they raised as Jewish 3 kids, my 2 brothers and me, and they lived a relatively quiet life, and they never till the death of my mother in 2004, who was the last to die, they never suffered anti-Semitism in this country. They were really very well received, very well accepted, and they lived a very happy Jewish life during all day long. Even in the 70s, I have to tell you, and then I finish this question, the first part, it was an experiment to bring to Venezuela the OLP office, which was Oficina de Liberación Palestina, Palestinian Liberation Office, and it was not, they do not succeed. The office was never working in Venezuela, and it was a signal of the very deep acceptation of the Jewish community here, and the rejection of everything who was considered anti-Semitic. And it was a very interesting experience in our community life, but sadly, things are not that way this time.
So before we get to now, I just want to do one more question. About the Holocaust, did your parents talk to you and your brothers about their experience? And whether they talked to you or not, your knowledge that they had survived, did it influence you in what you did as a child and what you do now?
Well, very interesting question. I do appreciate it very much. My mother was more pro telling us her experience. My father was not able to talk about his experience. And it was in their final years when the claims conference, I am completely sure everybody knows what I am talking about. They decided to get into Venezuela and to rise up the information. And I was living with them because I have a very big age difference with my brothers. So I was at home. I was 18 years old, and I was the responsible one to fulfill the information. So with my mother, it was very easy to gather and reach the information. But with my father, it was very difficult. I still have the original papers I written down. And after that, with the Spielberg project of the Museum of Holocaust, it was a very nice team that made an interview for both of them. That interview is in all the Museum of Holocaust. But I have to confess that even I saw the recording of my parents, they forbid us to see it when till they are alive. So I had to wait till they died, and it was a very long time after their death I saw those films, and I am completely sure the information was never complete, not even for me to fulfill the forms but as well never for the journalists when they made their film, because in my opinion, it was too extremely terrible, especially for my father in 3 concentration camps, to tell all his truth. For my mother, she was a little more outspoken, so it was easier. But I am also sure she never spoke out everything.
No, I understand what you're saying, Daniel. I hear that so many times, and even today, my mother was in a concentration camp. She's not alive anymore, but I hear from one still living friend that that friend heard things from my mother she never told her children. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel, there seemed, so what you said was there was no or not much anti-Semitism in Venezuela until the beginning of the 21st century,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then it changed. Can you please explain to us what happened then?
Well, as I'm sure everybody knows, after 40 years of a democratic system we had, a rise to the presidency, military man who was Hugo Chavez Frias. Hugo Chavez, perhaps himself, he was not personally anti-Semitic, but at the beginning, of course, but he contract an advisor who was one of the main anti-Semitic philosophers in South America, who was called Norberto Ceresole. And he taught what means to be anti-Semitic to Hugo Chavez in one hand. In the other hand, Chavez decided to break the tradition that we had in Venezuela, that our best friend was United States, first place, second place it was Europe. And he decided that the world has to be multipolar, whatever it means. And he wanted to cut down all the relationships, both with United States mainly, the second level of distancing with Europe. And he established a very strong bonding, of course, with Cuba, first of all, but also with Iran, Russia, and Turkey, and China. Those countries, those 5 countries, are the main supporters of all the Sistema Chavista, the Chavista system, political and economical system. And he got into a very, very profound and deep relationship with Saddam Hussein, with the governors of Iran, of Iraq. So those were our new biggest friends. The last president of Iran, the former, had the liberty symbol of Venezuela. And we as a Jewish community, we were very deeply offended why that president was receiving such an honor, because in that country we are not able to talk about liberty. But all those countries, mainly Iran and perhaps in a lower level, Iraq, and also Turkey, I have to tell you, they were teaching this new system, which is a military system in Venezuela since 1999, to become anti-Semitic, and also this very close advisor to Chavez. So during the first 7 or 8 years, it was a passive way of new anti-Semitism. And after that, we had a terrible, terrible issue with one of our biggest synagogues, which was an active manifestation of anti-Semitism.
So it almost sounds like the story of Pesach, or the story of Purim, where an anti-Semitic advisor to the king turns around the life of the Jews from good to bad. Pesach, a new person on the throne, and suddenly everything switches from good to bad for the Jews.
You are very, very accurate in your appreciation. Can I use it in new interviews?
Anytime.
Thank you. Great.
No.
Very accurate. Very accurate.
What happened to the synagogue that you mentioned?
We'll get to that.
Okay. Okay.
So in the past 2 decades, Daniel, the police sometimes aggressively raided Jewish schools and synagogues to quote unquote investigate allegations that turned out to be baseless. Also, gangs vandalized and damaged synagogues. A few times this was during flare-ups of the Arab-Israeli conflict. How was this during the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas last spring? Did you observe a peak in anti-Semitism then as well?
Well, it's a very complex question. I am grateful for that. It was a process with ups and downs, because thanks God, the Venezuelan people themselves, they are not anti-Semitic. They were never taught by their parents or grandparents to hate Jews. But of course, in every society, in my opinion, there is a small amount of anti-Semitism. There is no such a society which is completely pure without any kind of anti-Semitism. Well, in Venezuela was more or less the same. The huge part of the society, they don't even understand what mean to be Jew. We were monsieur, which is a nationalized word for monsieur in French, and we were foreign people who came to Venezuela, and the treatment the Jewish community gave to their employees and our related people were very good relationships, generally speaking. So there were no real reason why to become anti-Semitic. Perhaps very few isolated cases of an envious feeling of how the Jewish group, the Jewish community, began to rise up, to develop, to get richer, but it was not notorious at all. So it was with our actual president, with Nicolas Maduro, the first time Venezuela, when the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, we broke relationships with the state of Israel.
What year is it?
I don't have it in my hands, but it was around 2005, I guess.
Okay, just around.
2005 or 2006. And I had a very particular personal experience when I had to go to a congress to Israel, because just in time I got a Venezuelan Israeli visa into my Venezuelan passport. But when I entered into Israel, they asked me why I have an Israeli visa on my Venezuelan passport. It was 3-4 hours of interrogatories, and thanks God, everything went very well. I get into Israel, I give my lesson and everything with that. But it was the first time that, in my knowledge, a Venezuelan person had a little bit of trouble to enter Israel. But it was very recent, a few weeks before that, when we broke relationships. It was an order of Chavez, and it was the time he cursed Israel.
Oh.
And of course, we will never forget that event. It was one of the most horrifying moments I had in my knowledge related to my faith and to my deep love to Israel. I never imagined that I was going to receive, as a Jewish and as how can I tell you, Zionist in some way, a curse related to the most sacred thing in my life. But it was a very short period that it cooled down a little bit, and 1 or 2 years after that, first the main Sephardic synagogue in Caracas was corrupted. Some people, they break the gates, they enter the synagogue, they paint in the wall things, they turn out the Torah, they took the Torah to the floor. It was very, very shocking. I live quite near from that synagogue, so I went there. And when I arrived, a lot of people crying. It was the first time with swastika in Venezuela, in a sacred place. Perhaps there were swastikas in the history of the country, perhaps in a street, but in a synagogue, never. And very, very, it was an unforgettable moment. But after that, continuous meetings between the community leaders and a few close persons from the government to the Jewish community, that manifestation of explicit anti-Semitism, they mostly disappeared, not completely, mostly. But you know, the evil was bring in some way to the country, and it began a very huge emigration from the Jewish community. We were in the 70s around 54,000, and we are now around 3,000, more or less.
And what's going on today? I mean, now that there are even so many fewer Jews, has it just been quieted? Or is there anti-Semitism, for example, when Jewish students want to go to university? Is it subtle anti-Semitism or overt?
Or from the government?
Well, the government, for sure, he's trying to show that they are friends of us. Let me explain this thing. A few years ago was the 50th anniversary of arriving of the main Sephardic rabbi in the country. So the government gave to him a very, very important condecoration, and he was really very well treated from the government. He was invited to go to the presidential palace. So they try to revert that situation. We never had really big problems to bring to the country kosher food, never. But it was a time, 2-3 years, it was very difficult. It was not impossible, but very difficult. And it was because of the government. But after these 2-3 years, the situation improved. We do have several places in Caracas in which we're able to find kosher food. We had 2 kosher restaurants. They never had any kind of problem or anti-Semitic manifestation, which was noticeable. But, you know, I don't want to be dramatic, but somehow it is not exactly the same, because now everybody knows what is to be a Jew, where does the Jew community lives, which are where they work actually, and who is the family of who. And we never had that situation before. Now we know that in the government, everybody knows where the Jewish are. And this is one of the several reasons a lot of Jew people, members of the community, they are out from the country. This is the reason we are shrinking very fastly.
Yes, we know from the experiences from our parents who were Holocaust survivors that that can be a dangerous thing if the government knows who is Jewish and who is not and where to find them. And so last spring, from what I understand, Daniel, there is not so much anti-Semitism against Jews or their religion. There is anti-Zionism. There's anti-Israel rhetoric, a lot going on, right?
Wow.
And so last spring, there was a flare-up of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, right? So even here in the United States, we saw also, and also in Europe and everywhere in the world, we saw a flare-up of anti-Semitic acts towards, you know, the anger towards Israel. Let's say the political anger towards Israel was acted out in certain instances against Jews in the street, even here in the United States, in New York, in Los Angeles, in Boston. Did you see any of that happen, or did you hear more hate towards the Jewish state during that flare-up of the conflict in the Middle East?
Yeah, well, that distinction you are making is extremely important to understand what is happening in Venezuela. The explicit manifestation against Judaism is in a very small quantity, let's say in this way. But there is a very strong anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist political discourse. You know, Venezuela was one of the countries who voted for the creation of the state of Israel. And Israel still today is very grateful to Venezuela, historically speaking, as one of the countries who voted for the creation of the state of Israel. So politically speaking, again, it's very hard to understand two things. The first thing is that we do not have any kind of diplomatic representation from Israel in Venezuela. Absolutely nothing. Not an embassy, not a consulary office, not or a honorary consulary office, nothing, absolutely nothing. The only Israeli office, let's say in this way, we do have in Venezuela is a commercial, the office who manages commercial issues between Israel and Venezuela, which manages mostly zero. Okay, but from the government, there is a strong support for the Palestinian cause. Even there are big, very big walls in which are very well done, you know, expressing that the Venezuelan people supports Palestine, free Palestine, and Israel go down, and Israel is the hell, and it's absolutely clearly explicit in a lot of places in Caracas, a lot of places. They are trying not to use the word Jew, but they are using the word Israel. And the relationship, especially the last 2 or 3 years with Iran, is bigger and bigger and bigger. And we do have a stronger, every day stronger Arab community here in Venezuela. The Arabic community was very small, and we were in very good relationships with them. There were a lot of very strong bonds, especially commercial bonds, with the Jewish community and the Arabic community, but it is very different nowadays. And the existence of this kind of relationships, especially with Iran, is making me very, very nervous, because one of the fields of the relationship, of course, is commercial, but another field is technological development. And those bonds are especially strong with the military statement of the country, because the political system in Venezuela is a military system with civil faces. Our president, of course, is a civil person, but the system, the logic, the main actors, everything is military completely. And the relationships are with the military groups in all around the country. And Venezuela, I have to tell you, Caracas is a very small city compared to the size of the country. And Iran is working with the military groups inside the country. So it's nearly 1 million square kilometers in which they are developing things we don't know what they are.
And which could have consequences for everybody, but certainly for the Jews.
Yes, but also for United States.
That's exactly what I'm thinking as I'm listening to you.
Yeah, yeah, because if there is a rhetoric against Israel, you cannot imagine the rhetoric against United States.
Yeah.
So, you know, we are afraid. We do not have any kind of diplomatic relationship with the United States. We don't even have flights, direct flights to the United States. There is no relationship. But we do have direct flights from Caracas to Tehran. We do have direct flights from Caracas to Istanbul, to Moscow. So, you know, not only we have to be worried, but also America.
Exactly. I do a lot of Holocaust reading, and it's like I keep seeing the repetition of patterns and how people are not noticing. You know, we keep saying never again. That's what our show is about. But if you don't start paying attention to these patterns, we're going to be in deep doo-doo. So I see our time is about running out, and we want to give you a chance to say your last thoughts. But if you could include in it, I mean, is there anything that people in Venezuela can safely say, speak up, or is it so unsafe? And is there anything here in the rest of the world that we can do to help?
Well, we appreciate if you pray a lot.
Okay.
And if you are able to do exactly what Evelyn did with her documentary film, which is absolutely outstanding, extraordinary, please, you have a lot of people you can interview from Venezuela. We want to be here. I am taking a risk because of this marvelous interview you are making to me. I am very, very grateful. But, you know, I guess a big part of the world is not completely clear on what is happening in Venezuela, even there is 23 years going on these issues. So all information you are able to share with academics, with a non-profit organization, with multilateral organizations, with other countries, we're going to be very grateful. We are not feeling ourselves in a very big danger, daily speaking, but the truth is that the Jewish community is going to disappear very soon from this country that was once one of the most wonderful countries in the world, especially for Jews. So I am very grateful for all of you, and I am grateful also for the person who is seeing this podcast. And I ask for consideration for dissemination of this information and to take us in Venezuela in account. And Phyllis, Evelyn, I am really, really grateful to both of you for taking me, giving me this opportunity to share with you some thoughts. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And thank our listeners. And we do think that Venezuela doesn't get enough of the notice in the world stage. So hopefully in the coming year, more and more people will be hearing these podcasts. And
yeah, and we haven't even discussed that Hezbollah also has a big presence in Venezuela. So that's, you know, also something to pay attention to. But go ahead.
Yes,
time is up.
Exactly. And if you want to come back later in a few months and continue the conversation, we'd be happy to have you. And speaking of Evelyn's documentary, please, everyone who hasn't seen it, it's so important. It is called Never Again. It's now, you can see it on Amazon and on YouTube. And you can get more information about my free nonfiction Holocaust theater project at thinedgeofthewedge.com. It's been professionally translated into German. I'm hoping someday someone will offer to professionally translate it into Spanish. That's another topic. And for all our listeners, wherever you can, without putting yourself in physical danger, please, please speak up against anti-Semitism and hate.